everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the first Landlord Lens of 2021. It's the content collaboration between Property Tribes and the National Residential Landlords Association. My name is Vanessa Warwick. I'm the co-founder and community manager of Property Tribes and also a landlord of 18 odd years now. And joining me as always is NRLA CEO Ben Beadle. So Ben, happy New Year to you.
Yeah, happy New Year to you. And what a year it's going to be, I'm sure. Good afternoon to everybody that's dialed in.
Absolutely, and for those that are new to the Landlord Lens, a quick bit of insights into the format. We look at the trending topics on the Property Tribes forum. They all go into an individual silo and they're curated by an algorithm in the background that looks at how many people are commenting, how many people are viewing the topic, etc. Ben and I look at these topics and just discuss them in a little bit of detail, and we tend to have 3 or 4 mini topics and then one kind of bigger topic. So Ben, it's very interesting. We're coming towards the end of January now. On Property Tribes, landlords were a little bit slow off the mark to get back into gear, which is, I guess, understandable, facing another lockdown, etc. But of course, one of the evergreen topics at this time of year is market predictions. My crystal ball is looking rather fuzzy for 2021. How about yours?
Well, I threw mine out the window a long time ago, Vanessa. A fool will try and predict this market, but I guess that's what it's going to make us. It's always interesting, I think, to have a little look forward and to see how we think things are going to pan out. But as I've said on this webinar before, I think the situation is so uncertain at the moment that the only certain thing is more of the same. I feel.
Well, I think we've got one kind of event on the horizon, and that is the ending of the stamp duty holiday on the 31st of March. There are, moves afoot to extend it or, maybe dilute it in some way, such as allowing exchanged properties to continue on with the holiday. It's interesting for landlords on a number of levels. What's your view on what's going to happen? Do you think the market's going to drop off a cliff?
I think it might. I think that the stamp duty holiday is obviously much touted. I think there's going to be a discussion in Parliament on Monday about it. I think with this type of thing, all that it actually does is bring forward purchasers that were probably going to have bought in any event. So it's kind of taking a bit of a hit on the money now. That said, the housing market is incredibly important to the economy of this country, and so I think it is going to be a really finely balanced decision. My gut is probably telling me that it won't be extended, but who knows, frankly.
I think it's interesting that there's a lot of negativity about. I came across this new term called doom scrolling recently, where you're on social media and just everything is doom, and because you look at it, then the algorithm puts more doom into your feed. And I've made a New Year's resolution not to look at all the doom and gloom. I think the positive thing is that for this lockdown number 3, the market has stayed open, so we should be grateful for that.
We should, and I spoke with the housing minister a couple of weeks ago, Chris Pincher, when there was frankly a bit more discussion about whether housing should remain open or not. And the long and short of it was that he told me it would be one of the last things to close, such is the importance of it. And I think that's a helpful steer, because the fact of the matter is that people do still need to move, and if we know anything about landlords and agents, it's that they're actually quite a creative and resourceful bunch. and I've no doubt that they will be availing themselves of the technology that exists out there in terms of things like virtual viewings that work very, very well, and frankly they sort the wheat from the chaff in terms of those people that would have nothing better to do on a Saturday afternoon than view a few properties. In this market, it really does separate those the hot buyers from those that just want to browse. So look, the market is incredibly important, and I think the chatter around it closing has gone away somewhat. But the issue, there's actually a couple of important things that are happening on the 31st of March. The first one is obviously the stamp duty, and that's the thing about creating a cliff edge. At some point, that cliff edge does have to come to an end, and if it's not the 31st of March, it will be. We'll be having the same conversation, a month before the previous date. So, I'm less fussed about that one, if I'm truthful. But the other thing that we should also think about is the transitional provisions that are in place in terms of extended notice periods and the like that have been put in that are due also to expire on the 31st of March. And putting me on the spot there, I don't know that we're going to see a massive change in relation to those notice periods. We've obviously got a big concession, Vanessa, around the ability for landlords to be able to enforce a bailiff order where there are serious arrears of 6 months, and that has been in no small part down to the lobbying that the NRLA have done. And the critical point about that is that it allows pre-COVID arrears for which there can be no justification for landlords not able to enforce their order to be dealt with. I know it's been spun of various ways around loopholes, but it was a deliberate decision to allow that. And my view on it is, as I've said in the media, that the best way to cure the problems around eviction are to deal with the reasons that landlords evict their tenants. Getting rid of Section 21 isn't going to make that go away. It's around affordability. It's around the pounds, shilling and pence in people's pockets to be able to afford their rent. And I made that point to Chris Pincher. We do think greater support needs to be availed to tenants to meet their obligations, because frankly, rent debt is the tenants' problem, not the landlords.
Absolutely, and that kind of segues nicely onto our next trending topic, which received 73 comments on Property Tribes as of this morning, and that was the news of what is known as the debt breathing space. And this is new legislation brought in to protect people who may be suffering from mental health issues or have other specified problems. And Ben, this was greeted by the PT community with a great deal of concern initially. Many thought that it would be open to abuse, and there was a lot of GDPR issues concerning tenants' mental health, etc. I think since then, people have started to realise it's actually not quite as drastic as it first sounded. So what's your view on that?
Well, it's exactly that, Vanessa. I mean, it's important to get across that the debt respite scheme, or breathing space as it's more commonly known, hasn't been brought in specifically to address the landlord and tenant relationship. We're not that special. Of course, landlords and tenants fit into this, and to be fair, I can see some logic behind having a debt moratorium. But the bit that I would get across to landlords is, firstly, it actually doesn't apply to Section 21. You may be interested to know, but essentially it comes in on the 4th of May, and it will apply to most debts accrued before or after that date, including arrears of rent. And that's obviously the bit that we are most interested in. It's actually quite a high test, and with all of these things, I ask myself as a landlord, if I'm in this position where somebody owes me a significant amount of money and I'm going down the court proceedings, in my experience, I never hear from the tenant during those proceedings, and the court case proceeds invariably they don't turn up, I get possession of my property, I enforce that order, and I get the keys and I change the locks and people move out. I don't think that this is going to fundamentally change it, other than the fact that it gives those tenants who are genuinely serious about dealing with their arrears some time to come up with a plan to deal with them. Now, if they are serious about that, actually, as a landlord, isn't that what I want? Now, some people will say that, isn't this just a tool as a delaying tactic? Isn't it just going to give me an extra month? And yes, I'm sure there will be a small number of people that abuse the merits of the system that have been put in place. But it's important to say that, as I say, the test for a moratorium being granted is actually quite a high bar to pass. So during a moratorium, a tenant in arrears cannot be contacted to seek payment of the debt subject to the moratorium, and cannot be asked to pay any part of that debt or any interest on it. That's what it says. But it does mean that they have to pay the existing arrangements going forwards, and there also has to be a realistic prospect that that back debt can be paid. So yes, I can understand that landlords might view it with caution, but I suggest that any tenant who isn't serious about making their obligations won't make an application in the first place. And those that are serious, actually, they're exactly the type of tenants that, as a landlord, we want to engage with and have a conversation with. Nothing more frustrating than wanting to get in touch with somebody to discuss either property condition or arrears, and you get the ostrich treatment. That's no fun at all. And I think this will flush it out.
Well, thank you very much for that perspective on it. And, I think it highlights the value of the Landlord Lens and the discussions on property tribes, because we have David Smith, very well-known landlord and tenant solicitor, commenting. And he was one of the first people that joined the conversation and said, actually, don't get too worked up about it. It's not as bad as it first seems. And as you rightly say, Ben, it's not, directed at the landlord-tenant relationship. It's a very wide-ranging, overarching scheme for all kinds of the debts that we've been discussing. So it's good to get perspective on things when, we do feel a little bit under the cosh, to say the least. And that brings me really on to my next topic, which is the March budget. And there are rumours that there are going to be changes to property taxes. Obviously, the coronavirus response has cost the government billions, if not trillions, and they are going to be looking at ways to recoup some of that money. And property taxes does seem to be on the agenda, but nobody really knows in what format yet.
That's right. I mean, the one thing I would say about this is, we're still in a lockdown where we still have our liberty restricted. It doesn't feel to me that we're making good progress. We have a vaccine. We're ahead of the game in that regard. But we still have people that need support. So anybody trying to position the budget as being a recovery budget, we've got to be on the way to recovery first, and I don't really feel that we are. The other point, and we will be making representations about this, is that the government or landlords have been doing the government a massive favour, as far as I can see, in terms of subsidising rents, doing the right thing, as I would expect a lot of landlords with very strong relationships. I've said this before on this medium, that we do have strong relationships with our tenants, and it's just as bloody well we do, because the government have been relying very, very heavily on landlords to carry the can, as we have said in the media. So I don't think, obviously this has got to be paid back, but I just and inevitably there is going to be, everyone's going to have to pay for it, and an increase in taxes is going to follow across the board, I would think. I'm just not entirely sure that we're going to see the worst of it in this budget. because as I say, I think we've still got some recovering to do, and rather than hit landlords or whoever in the pocket, it doesn't feel like the right. Again, I could be completely off the wall in that comment, and we're all going to get absolutely annihilated. But rest assured, the NRLA are making very strong representations to Treasury ministers, peers, and frankly anybody that will listen about the best way to deal with some of this stuff. And frankly, at the moment, it's about supporting people to stay in their homes and to pay their way, rather than a couple of pence on income tax or more draconian capital gains tax. The other thing I would just throw in there, and I do try and mention this every time because it's a bugbear of mine, but Section 24, it was announced a few weeks ago that 150 million quid had been raised off of the back of landlords through Section 24 changes. So if you compare to what was forecast, nothing, not a significant increase as that was forecast. So I kind of think the argument that's being made is that landlords have already taken a bloody great walloping, and we should be making that point to ministers and Treasury officials in the coming days and weeks. In fact, we already have, but we will continue to bang the drum.
Fantastic. Such important work you do there. A lot of what we've been talking about is speculation, what might be coming down the pipe for landlords. But of course, being a landlord is a very long-term investment. And it's, we've said this before, you can't really make business decisions based on what might happen in the future. You can only really base any business decision on where you are today, 26th of January in this case, what you know to be true today. And I'm sure you would join me, Ben, in urging landlords not to make knee-jerk decisions, based on short-term things when this is a long-term investment. And, we are hearing of large volumes of landlords that have just had enough now, and they want to sell up. We're seeing that quite a bit on property tribes, landlords saying, I'm throwing in the towel. And I think we want to encourage people to keep the faith and keep their powder dry and see how 2021 pans out, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, I've been doing buy to let for a similar period of time to you, Vanessa. There's no doubt that things are getting harder and will continue to get harder. I'm not principally against regulation, additional regulation of the sector, because whether we like it or not, there are a small rump of landlords out there that give us all a bad name, and regulation, unfortunately, is the only way to deal with those people, as well as more robust enforcement, of course. So I as I say, I'm not against regulating the sector, but it needs to be done in such a way that brings landlords along as part of the solution. But people on this on this collaboration will make their own judgments, and I can well imagine that if people have been in the market for a long period of time, it is feeling like one thing after another. I would say hold your nerve. I do think there will be rewards in the future, but people must do what's right for them. And the point that we make to government and the like is that confidence is low, and there isn't a massive alternative out there for individual landlords, or to individual landlords, frankly. Yes, you've got some build to rent people out there that are building homes, but that's not made a massive dent in the sector, if we're honest about it. Local authorities, frankly, are going to be on the bones of their backside in terms of being able to house people. They're going to be leaning on landlords at the moment and in the future, and there is not a significant house building program that delivers anywhere near the number of affordable or social homes that's needed. So there is still an opportunity for landlords, absolutely. Are the margins as sexy as they once were? Probably not. And it's against that backdrop that people should make the decision.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned build to rent, because there was an article in the Telegraph, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, saying build to rent, the next nail in the coffin for buy to let. And I was asked to commentate for that article by the Telegraph. And I said, actually, private sector landlords are not really too worried about it, because it's mainly, shiny new flats in city centres with above average rents, because they've got additional services like concierge and gym, etc. I said the average landlord with a terraced house in the outskirts or a small market town is not going to be affected by it, because the build to rent operators are not building family homes at the moment. There's two that I know of, but they're not making a dent on the market. And I was just going to say, Ben, that the Telegraph left out my comment, because the whole thing was doom and gloom about private sector landlords, being they're having their business destroyed by build to rent operators coming into their area. And it just shows that they have a certain narrative that they want to stick to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I would venture a step further, Vanessa, and say that the build-to-rent operators might make my places look cheap, frankly, build to rent isn't for everybody. I think so. I'm not too worried about it. Obviously, it's a direction of travel that is going to increase, but seriously, I do think that we have a massive housing shortage in this country of decent, affordable accommodation. Build to rent, in my view, doesn't deal with the affordability element, because they package everything up and you pay things at a premium. Now, that will appeal to a certain sector of the market, there's no doubt about that, but it won't appeal to everybody.
Indeed, and I actually think that the conditions that we find ourselves in actually favour small private landlords, because of the direct relationship that we can have with our tenants. And just sprung into my mind just now, actually, a rather random thing, but you'll see where I'm going with this. I ordered some candles from a little Scottish candle company on the island of North Uist, which is somewhere that I've always wanted to go. And lovely lady sent me my candles and then wrote to me saying, did you receive them okay? And, did you like them? And I got into a conversation with her and just said how much we love Scotland and so on. And she sent me some pictures of the view from her window, from her candle workshop. And it was just so wonderful to have such a close relationship with a business that they actually talked about their life and sent me some little pictures. And I think we can equate that to the private sector landlord, who is a face, a real human, not a kind of big faceless corporation where you're hanging on the phone for 40 minutes with some dire recorded music blaring out. I think we're going to come into our own, actually, because of the very personal service that we provide.
I think that's right. I mean, I don't think we should overlook that. I think build to rent does have a role and will appeal to a certain sector. But I agree. I used to work in a very similar area. So I have to be in exactly this area. So I have to be slightly careful with what I say. I remember talking to a tenant who owed a significant amount of money. I spoke with him and asked what his plans were to repay it back. And he said to me, almost word for word, if it was an individual landlord, you'd have more chance of me paying it. But with a faceless corporation that have much broader shoulders, I'm not going to pay my rent and you'll have to evict me. And I thought that was quite an interesting analogy from the tenant side. But you're right. I do think the relationship is much trashed in the media between the landlords and tenants, but it's far stronger than those people would have you believe. And just look at the English Housing Survey with the high satisfaction that's in there. And the reason that things have worked as well as they have during COVID in terms of keeping people in their home is because of that goodwill that exists between landlords and tenants. Not in every situation, granted, but the vast majority.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, as we've stated time and time again on the Landlord Lens, that relationship is something to be nurtured, and to try and work with tenants. You know, and tenants, I think, do respect that we are all in the same boat together. Everybody is experiencing, you know, the impact of COVID in their lives in one way or another. We've actually had a very dear friend die of COVID on Saturday night, didn't even make it into hospital, died at home. And you know, we're all impacted in it, but in some way. And you know, I think these more personal relationships where tenants know their landlord and their landlord is, you know, understanding of the situation, and the tenant also respects that the landlord is in the same boat. I think that, you know, there is a lot to be said for us working together through this. And I think in future, many tenants may actually want to rent from a private sector landlord rather than a big corporation, because they recognise this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you know, I'm very much of the view that the strength of the relationship is a really good point of the private rented sector. But I do also form the view, Vanessa, that the government can only lean on landlords for so long. And actually, whilst I accept that, you know, the measures that have been put in place are, to coin a phrase, unprecedented, with local housing allowance, universal credit, and a whole range of things that have been put in to help people meet their obligations, there does need to be more. There does need to be more financial support to the sector, and you know, we are advocating greater financial support to tenants so that enables them to be able to pay their rent, from which landlords will benefit. So we are pushing the drum quite hard on this, because you know, it's going to be coming up to almost a year since the first lockdown in sort of, you know, 4-6 weeks time, and you know, there are various surveys, whether it's our survey or Citizens Advice, yeah, everyone's pointing to the same problem, which is that, you know, landlords and tenants have been muddling along the best that they can, and you know, relying on the strength of relationships that they have. But actually, what's needed now is some breathing space to allow people to be able to either take a loan or get a grant to pay their rent, because that, in the end, is the best way to deal with tenancy sustainment. Otherwise, you're going to put the landlord in a very, very difficult position of having to evict somebody that they really don't want to. And that's a very regrettable position.
Okay, I think, just looking at the time, we'll move on to our main topic now. And that was sparked by a video that we posted earlier in the week, called The Top 3 Property Risks of 2021. And you can watch that video on Property Tribes. It's a conversation between myself and Paul Mahoney, who is a prolific property investor and also MD of a company called Nova Financial that supports landlords in building portfolios. And Paul went through his 3 top risks of 2021. I'll just briefly pressay them here. Number 1 was job loss. Obviously, we talked about furlough ending, and so forth, more people being unemployed, big concerns about that. Number 2, and I really like this one, he said, don't consider the UK property market as a whole. You need to recognise that it's loads of little micro markets. So when people say there's going to be a crash of 10% in the UK property market, it could be that some places actually go up 15%. You can't use averages in anything to do with property as the overall market. And he was keen to suggest that don't invest only in one town that is dominated by an industry or one particular employer, because if that employer goes into difficulty or the industry starts to fail, then you've literally got all your eggs in one basket. So I think he was really saying you need to diversify and have properties in various different locations to hedge your risk. And his final thing was, don't try and time the market. And that kind of harks back to what we said earlier about, you know, landlords making decisions. His view is it's not timing the market, it's time in the market. You know, I totally subscribe to that as well, Ben. I've always said we can only buy today. we can't go back in time as much as we might like to and buy a £4,000 house 25 years ago, and we can't, you know, go forward in time and buy property. So today is all that any of us have to do to take any kind of action. So those were his top 3 risks, and people joined in and had other risks such as legislative risk, you know, tax risk, and so on. What are your views, Ben, if I put you on the spot and said, what would your 3 top risks of 2021 be for landlords?
Well, I think the first one the chap mentioned is certainly resonating with me, which is, you know, that the wider environment in that we're all operating. I think, you know, as a landlord, I am going to be a bit pickier over you know, where people are joining me from in terms of, you know, their background, in terms of the industry that they come from, jobs and security. I think that's an inevitable consequence, not just because of COVID, but whenever you get a downturn, and that's actually, you know, what we're talking about here: recession, jobs, ability to be able to pay. It's basic risk management, isn't it? And I think, you know, from my perspective, I will be looking more at guarantees. You know, if I have even the slightest concern over a tenant, I might be looking for somebody to guarantee it. So I think, you know, the tenant availability and background is going to be incredibly important from the point of view of being able to sustain that tenancy. The second one for me is around legislation and regulation, because actually what we have seen in these past few months is the market as we know it. I mean, just I know, again, you know, obviously the backdrop of disaster that's happened, but the market as we know it, I mean, who could have predicted that we would have 6 months notice period, that we would be not able to get possession of our properties in a way that we have been able to do so freely in the past. I'm not saying that any of those decisions are wrong. I understand why those decisions have been made to keep people in their homes, but it is something that we need to be cognizant of. And I know that, you know, from talking to Housing Minister Pincher a couple of weeks ago, that they do want to look ahead as to what a transitional provision looks like, with one eye on the Renters Reform Bill in the future. So, you know, the concept of changing legislation and increased regulation is not going to go away. And frankly, if that's not your bag, then you know, probably get off at the next stop would be my advice, because I think it is only going to continue in that vein. And then the third one for me is around, I mean, your chap mentioned around micro markets. You know, I sort of think that, you know, knowing your market is incredibly important at the best of times. It's so important at the worst of times. And whether that's knowing your tenant or knowing what sort of industry you are operating in from the point of view of a target audience, I think is incredibly important. As you know, as we've discussed before, Vanessa, you know, my market is students, and frankly, you know, I don't know what the future holds for that market in the very short term. All I know is that my tenants are in their properties. I know there's been a lot of talk about rent strikes and, you know, students not able to attend universities, or being stuck at home for Christmas, and remote lessons and stuff like that. But my lot are still in there, and they're still paying, and they still have access to their home that they are using. So I think, you know, making sure you know your tenants and the market that you're operating in as far as you can. Obviously, from my perspective, I don't know what's going to happen in July, August, September, but I'm pretty sure that, you know, in the short to medium term, that there will still be a need for those people to be close to their campuses in a COVID secure world, because frankly they're going to be sick of their parents or their family or whatever. They do want to have their own space. So that market, I'm fairly comfortable is going to be there. I just don't know what's going to happen this summer, to be honest with you.
Well, I think we can both agree that all the fallout surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns has definitely amplified risk. And for landlords that don't do intense due diligence, I think I think it's going to be the financial loss will be even greater. So landlords do have to become experts in undertaking due diligence in 2021 for sure. We've actually just run a month-long campaign called Landlord Digital Lives, which has been encouraging landlords to take a digital first approach and use all the tools out there that are, can help them mitigate risk. And I think one prime example of that is using tenant referencing that accesses open banking. So you can get a snapshot of your tenant's financial position today on the 26th of January, not typically, a backdated back history of their financial position. And then we've seen other really useful digital tools come in, such as, virtual viewings and digital keys, and all of these kind of different things that are helping landlords continue on. And I think one of the other things probably I think is a good thing to highlight, Ben, is the importance of inventories and midterm property inspections going forwards as well. I mean, I think they've always been important, but again, it's something that can, really, if you're doing midterm property inspections, it can definitely kind of nip problems in the bud. Obviously, we've got concerns about access and whatnot, but you could simply ask a tenant to film a little FaceTime video around the property for you, just to show what condition it's in. These are all little things that landlords actually need to think about more to be on top of their game and to mitigate those risks.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the other thing I would say is don't assume your agent's going to do it, or necessarily rely on your agent if you use an agent. I think, as a landlord, these are significant assets that we're talking about, and yes, you may have a really good agent that's looking after stuff, but what are their plans? Are they doing remote viewings? Are they able to give you some pointers here, or should you be getting a little bit more involved yourself? From my perspective, the inspections are important. I'm lucky that the relationship I've got with my tenants have been very, very long-term ones. Even the student ones have been with me for 3 years, which is quite unusual. And so I've sort of, I probably shouldn't say it on here, taken my foot off the pedal slightly in terms of inspections during COVID. But I also get, a few pictures here and there from them to let me know what's going on with the garden or whatever. So I think we can improvise. I mean, it could be a cannabis farm for all I know, I guess. But we do have to think slightly differently and a bit more creatively. And the good thing is that the tech is there to be able to help us.
We need to think about changing tenant priorities. There's a lot of things in the media about people looking for more space, a garden, a home office, these kind of things. We need to put ourselves in our tenants' shoes if we're thinking of acquiring a new investment. What are tenants looking for in this COVID-19 landscape? Interesting thing happened to me today. Tenant contacted the agent and said that there were 4 people in the house, all working from home, and that the broadband was insufficient. So I had to phone up the broadband provider today and increase the broadband speed. These are all kind of little things and little adjustments that landlords are going to be facing over the coming months, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. And whilst it is causing us to think about our investment habits and for tenants where they want to be, I'm also slightly, I don't know what the word is, but a bit more cautious about making longer term decisions through a COVID lens. I don't think good decisions are made when you're dealing with the extremes of the market, and what we're in at the moment, or what I hope at least, is an extreme of the market, and we will start to maybe not go fully back to the normal as we knew it before, because actually there are some benefits that have cropped up that we can learn from and adopt and champion, but we are what I consider to be at the extreme of the market. So you don't want to necessarily base your thinking on the worst case scenario when it could well be different in a year's time, or we hope that it will be different in a year's time. That's for sure.
No, I think that's very good advice, and we did say earlier, kind of don't make knee-jerk decisions or short-term decisions in what is a very long-term investment. But it's all things to add into the mix, and I think going onto property tribes or indeed the NRLA forum and chewing it over with other landlords, it really helps bring clarity to these kind of topics and discussions, see what other landlords are thinking, what they're doing. It really helps you become a more rounded landlord and business person, I think, to actually engage in these type of topics.
Yeah, I agree, and knowledge is king at the moment, isn't it? And the more quality information you've got access to, frankly, the better decisions you will make, because they will be an informed decision. And whether that's in collaboration with our advice line or through various forums that exist, there's quality advice there, and it's really, really important that landlords are informed on their decisions. And it's a bit, it's a bit like the harping back to the breathing space, Vanessa. Actually, when that stuff comes out, the immediate reaction is, oh my god, it's going to majorly screw me over. And of course it may well screw one or two people over in time. We remain to see that. But again, arming yourself with the full information around what breathing space is about and how it's intended to work, and actually how it could potentially help resolve a difficult situation, is the best way to go about it, in my view.
100% agree. Fantastic. Well, that's the main part of the Landlord Lens. I'd now like to invite Stacey from Events Coordinator at the NRLA. I'd like to invite Stacey to join us, and hopefully she has a few questions for us. There she is.
Hi, we haven't had too many questions come in. The first one is about EPC. So if insulation takes the EPC rating to C, what more can be done to improve this further? If talked about legislation requires further upgrades after 2025.
Yeah, it's quite a specific question, this one, Stacey, and it reflects an area of growing interest that I think is just going to get bigger in terms of the energy outlook and direction of travel for rented properties. But the fabric of the property, to answer it a little bit, the fabric of the property is the first course of action to take in terms of cavity, loft, wall insulation. The concern that we have with the grant scheme so far is that it limits, if you've had that done, you kind of get knocked out at the first hurdle. So you've got primary and you've got secondary measures that you can avail yourself of. You could look at the heating system, but those are things that are going to be very expensive, and they also lack the technology at the moment, and they also don't lend itself to sort of small spaces and so forth. So, I mean, given the specifics of the question, I'll just reiterate that there is a voucher scheme that's ongoing until March 2022. The NRLA are developing proposals to government around what future financing should look like. But I would urge everybody to have a look at the Green Homes Grants Initiative and to see whether they can avail themselves of the grants that are there. Because what my worry is that uptake isn't as high as it should be, and I understand the reasons why it may not be massively high, but given the 2025 date and the push there, that really we need to avail ourselves of some of these grants and improve the rating ahead of the deadline. So it's a very specific question, so I will respond separately to it, but that gives a flavour to the energy efficiency debate that is going on at the moment.
Yeah, we actually have a thread on Property Tribes, quite a long running thread on this topic, and there's a list of little things that you can do to increase the energy efficiency level of a property, and one of them is to obviously change all the light bulbs to the more energy efficient LEDs as well. So there's lots of information out there to help you improve the energy efficiency, and without spending huge amounts of money.
And it's worth me just adding, actually, one of the other points in the question was around capacity, and the capacity to be able to get some quite intrusive work done. I think that's to directly answer the question, that's an area that we're looking at the moment. There is a big lead in time to 2025, but if this month's anything to go by, it will come around very, very quickly. Back to you, Stacey.
Okay, the next question is, have we heard of any extension on bringing in the EICR for existing tenancies?
So we've been making the case, and we had a conversation with MHCLG yesterday where we made that case again and pushed very hard. Interestingly, the angle that we are exploring here is not just landlords who are worried about the date and worried about being able to get stuff done, but also, given the environment that we are in, and existing tenancies are actually the tenants that don't want unnecessary people coming into their property because of the risk of spreading COVID. So it's an issue that I think is coming up the agenda. I know it needs to come up the agenda a bit quicker, but we did receive some more positive soundings than we have been getting. What the argument is, obviously, is that there's been a fairly lengthy lead-in time for people to be able to do this work, and that, frankly, landlords have had enough time to be able to do it. I don't necessarily buy that argument in its entirety. I just think at the point that we're at the moment, it's a bit like the MOT extension during the first lockdown. People were given a little bit of extra time until the new lockdown, but until we knew a little bit more about it. And I do think this falls into the category. So long story short, we are pushing it a bit harder, that's for sure.
Okay, just to jump in there as well, just for landlords, obviously we have to complete our self-assessment tax returns by the 31st of January, but that because of the COVID pandemic, HMRC are being fairly lenient, and it's now been extended to the end of February. So if you haven't submitted your self-assessment tax return yet, I would definitely advise you to get on the case with that. You do have a little bit of leeway though.
Okay, the next question is, do you think the government will put back the introduction of the EICRs for, say, 3 months due to the COVID restrictions and the current difficulties?
So I think that was similar to the other question. Do I think they will? No. Are they looking at it? Yes. And are they more interested in it? Yes. As I say, we think they should take a bit more of a pragmatic view. This isn't landlords that don't want to do the work. Actually, it's more falling into the camp of existing tenants don't want to let people into their property without good reason. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out what the outcome should be to that, in my view. Another question?
Okay. The next question is there solid evidence of landlords withdrawing and at the same time rents are flat, so reduced supply is not raising prices?
It's an interesting one. So I don't think landlords are leaving the sector in quite the volumes that is suggested. I mean, clearly some are. I think it's more of a case that some units are leaving the control of landlords who have 1, 2, 3 properties and going into the hands of bigger landlords. So I think what we may be starting to see is an element of consolidation with those that you know, watched a property program and thought that they would buy one, actually thinking, you know what, this is, you know, it's like the Smiler ride at Alton Towers. You know, it's a real roller coaster of a ride, and I can't handle it. And getting out of the market, and others actually, you know, continuing to invest. And it's really interesting to see, actually, because I'm not investing at the moment, but I can see from our advice line that there are people out there that are still investing, and investing for the first time. Maybe they've got balls of steel, I don't know. But I think overall the net impact isn't a significant change, is what I would say. Vanessa, have you got a view?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. We've seen a huge influx of newcomer landlords on property tribes, probably since around November last year, and you know that we so much so that we actually brought up a new, you know, made a new category to host all their comments, because they were asking from a complete newcomer perspective, and it was very interesting. The kind of backgrounds they were coming from and what they were hoping to achieve, and also about their level of awareness of the headwinds facing landlords at the moment. So I think that there'll be some landlords of a certain age that were thinking of maybe retiring in 5 years' time, but have thought, actually, no, I've just had enough. I'm gonna, you know, close out early. And there'll be many landlords, and I would include myself in that, where I still keep the faith with property, but I'm not in buying mode for the foreseeable future. I'm just actually, I've been, over the last year, I've been doing a whole raft of refurbishments across my portfolio. And it's quite interesting, Ben, because when I started buying in 2004, I bought virtually all new builds. So my buying spree was between 2004 and 2009. So all of my properties are starting to come up for refurbishment at around the same time, which is worth bearing in mind. If you want to end up buying a load of new builds all at the same time, they're all, you know, we all know that property is going to need a minor facelift maybe every 4 to 6 years, and then probably a major facelift every 8 to 10 years. That's where mine are at. I've got to do some quite major complete refurbs and complete redecoration. So, you know, and new boilers and things like that coming into the equation can be expensive. So yeah, I'll go with what you said. We are seeing some anecdotal evidence of people saying, I've just had enough, I'm going into Bitcoin, is actually trends that we're seeing, which is an area that I know nothing about, and I find it very complex, and I tend to like to stick with what I know, being a very low risk profile of investor. But yeah, I think landlords are looking around, and some are looking at the commercial sector. We've seen a huge increase in warehousing and those kind of commercial buildings. They're in huge demand across the UK. So we will see some landlords going into other niche strategies, if you like, away from your standard buy-to-let.
I agree with that, Vanessa. And I think the other thing, if landlords are anything like me, they may actually be looking at the performance of a particular property, where the yield was kind of okay in a pre-Section 24 environment, and in a post-Section 24 environment, it's not worth keeping. And I think I fall into that category as well, where I'm looking at one property in particular that is, you know, has never been empty, but it just, you know, it's almost not worth me having it as part of the portfolio, given everything else that's taken into account with the spiteful Section 24 changes. And I suspect there will be some other people in that bracket as well. You need a high performing asset, not a marginal one.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Ben, because it kind of harks back to what we were saying about being a digital landlord. And permit me to say this, my husband is a minor shareholder in some software called Landlord, and what that software does, it's absolutely incredible. You put all your portfolio data in it, and it tells you the performance of each individual property, giving you many different metrics, and it also gives you the overall performance of your portfolio. So I totally agree with you. Now, you know, early in the new year is a good time to sit down with whatever you know, format you look at your portfolio in, whether that be on a spreadsheet, whether it be in some digital software, actually sit down and go through your properties, because it could be a missed opportunity to sell that underperforming property and buy, you know, wait for the stamp duty market crash, which I think's coming in March, and then pick up a bargain then that's much higher yielding. So it's good for landlords to have these kind of thought processes running through their heads at this time of year.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Stacey, should we take one more question and then we'll call it a day?
Yeah, so what is your opinion on purchase lease options and how they might be a good avenue to look down on in 2021?
Well, I don't have any experience on purchase lease options, if I'm honest with you. So I'm a simple chap that likes bricks and mortar and can kick the bricks. That's not something for me. Vanessa, have you got a view?
Well, I have. I think they work perfectly fine on commercial property. I think there's many great concerns about them on residential property, not least because lenders don't like them. So if you do reach the end of the option agreement and you're going to buy the property, you will have to buy it with cash or bridging, because you will not be able to get a mortgage. And this is not taught at the various shall I say, wealth creation seminars that go on around certainly online at the moment. You know, and I think the biggest thing to be aware of is that the gentleman who is known as the godfather of lease options, his name is Rick Otten. He was responsible for teaching all the people in the UK that train on this strategy. Mr. Otten, about 2 to 3 years ago, was fined the highest ever fine in Australian corporate history. He was fined £12 million for what was described as deceptive marketing, because he sold his courses that you could buy a property for £1. And it was found out during the course of this investigation that Mr. Otten himself had only done one lease option and it hadn't completed. So therefore I put it to you, if you can buy a property for £1, why wouldn't all the people training this strategy be out busy buying hundreds of properties for £1? Why would they teach you how to do it instead and charge you 10, 12, 15,000 pounds for the privilege of understanding how to do this? So yeah, Mr. Otten definitely was not a good advert for lease options at all, and the Australian court came down extremely hard on him, and he was very close to bankruptcy, I understand it. So I only wish that the UK government would clamp down on some of these what I consider to be very high risk strategies.
Fully endorse that. Well, Stacey, thank you very much for posing all of those questions. Thank you. If you've asked a question, hopefully we've answered it. If we haven't, we'll try and follow up thereafter. Over to you, Vanessa.
Well, just to say thanks to everybody for watching. This is a monthly event, and we'll be releasing the next date for February in due course. If you would like to watch this in retrospect, it will be on Property Tribes in the next day or two, and just keep tuning into the Landlord Lens. We love having you on board, and Ben, I think it is such a challenging year ahead for landlords that these kind of resources are very valuable to landlords, and they should take advantage of them.
Yeah, I certainly hope that people find them valuable. No doubt people on the call will give us some feedback thereafter of topics that they would like to see or to talk about. But I do think as a sector, as a segment of the private rented sector, there is so much we can do when we work together, and these types of events really just cement our understanding and access to information. So I do hope that people find them useful and that you will join in next month.
Yes, and do look on the NRLA website as well, because I know, Ben, I see all over social media you're doing lots of different content collabs with different people like Tessa Shepperson and other people. So I think it's part of your remit as the CEO that you've wanted to do a lot more on social media, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we want to work with as many collaborators as we can. As I say, you know, the greater representation we have, the greater membership that we have, and we're knocking on for 90,000 members at the moment. The more influence that we have, particularly when the doodah hits the fan, such as at the moment, we can make very, very strong representations on behalf of landlords. So yes, I do hope that people will consider membership if they haven't joined us already.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you for the next Landlord Lens in February. But for now, it's goodbye from myself and Ben.
Cheerio, folks.